The Field of 68 Media Network presents Red is the New Orange, a Syracuse basketball podcast.
Vince intercepts a pass, breakaway for the freshman guard, he flies and slams! Aerial assault from Judah Mintz.
Looking to go back door to Bell, they get it to a near corner three, knocks it down! Chris Bell, the sharpshooter.
Bringing you everything you need to know out of the 315.
Up top, Williams surges ahead, up with the right hand and in. A pretty up and under move from Benny Williams to beat his man.
Over to Taylor, he skips into the lane, puts up a floater, it drops in.
Let's get it started with your host, Ian Unsworth and Johnny Gadamowitz.
Well, the Orange are back in the win column. Syracuse takes down Bucknell 75-63. To break it all down, as always, Johnny Gadamowitz, Ian Unsworth with you here on Red is the New Orange. Make sure you drop us a follow. We're over on Twitter at F68_Cuse. That's where we tweet all our thoughts, all our podcasts, which maybe is how you're listening or watching right now. But if you're not, make sure you go check us out on Twitter because that is your one-stop shop for all things Red is the New Orange. Also, of course, the Field of 68, the entire podcast network, and all the shows that they're putting out, as conference play is pretty much just about here. A couple final non-conference tune-ups for everybody over the course of these next couple days. But then you flip that calendar over to January 2025. We won't give you the cliche about how fast time flies and how quick the non-conference goes, because I'm sure you feel it yourself. You don't need us to tell you that. But either way, Syracuse 12-point winners. And Ian, we both billed it as a game that Syracuse really kind of needed, and they delivered for the most part.
Yeah, for the most part. We saw the Syracuse team that looked pretty different from a week ago against Maryland. And a lot of different things happened in this game that we hadn't seen in the past. In the first half, Syracuse makes 6 3-pointers, scores 43 points. Wow, look at this offense go. Eddie Lampkin's really working inside against a 7-foot big who plays pretty straight up compared to Lampkin's low center of gravity, his ability to back guys down. But he had a good first half, the 12 points in the first half, and he was dominant at times. The Syracuse shooter stepped up, and the Orange had a wrinkle. For the first time in what feels like forever, Syracuse had a wrinkle. That 1-2-2 zone press that forced Syracuse turned it over 21 times, Bucknell gave it up 17, but Syracuse had 13 steals. Those are big numbers, and those are numbers that lead an offensively challenged team to wins. So that was good to see, because after feeling for the past couple games that Red Autry had come in 2 visiting arenas, 2 neutral sites without a plan, Syracuse had something for Bucknell. It's a shame that you got to have something for Bucknell and you can't save something like this for conference play, but that's where this team is at. So the 1-2-2 works, and we'll probably see it going forward.
I'm with you. It was nice to see kind of a measured approach and one that felt like had some rhyme and reason behind it. Yeah. I think for me, the takeaway is, I don't know, maybe it was there the whole time and we just didn't realize it, but I feel like the depth angle was really solid against Bucknell. And granted, you're playing Bucknell, but you had 9 guys play at least 11 minutes and meaningful minutes too. Like, we saw some good run from Peter Mastorovich, the Kyle Cuffs of the world, even Lucas Taylor, who, let's be frank, has had his struggles here through the first couple months. It felt like this was a game where a lot of those role players, a lot of those rotation guys that aren't going to be seeing, north of 28, 29 minutes per game, just could kind of exhale and take a little bit of a deep breath and figure out where they sort of fit into the equation a little bit. Because I think when you went through this a little bit of a dry spell, a lot of those guys, the Cuffs, the Mastoroviches, the Taylors, were kind of getting caught in no man's land. And it was nice to see them sort of, have an impact really on both ends, because as much as, they held their own offensively, like you were alluding to, Ian, the defense was really something that I think a lot of Syracuse fans were impressed with, because Bucknell offensively just could never really figure it out. They only had 2 guys in double figures all game.
Defensively, Kyle Cuff came in 3 minutes in to provide a little bit of energy, provide a little bit of that boost. And he, after the game, said that they call it the red press, this 1-2-2 zone. And Coach Red employs it to get the teams to play faster. Kyle Cuff postgame referenced the Colgate comeback from last year as when this press was first employed. And if you go back and watch that film, you'll see Syracuse down 21 in the second half, breaks out this 1-2-2 trap and makes the Raiders uncomfortable. And Syracuse wasn't down 21 by any means, but it felt like at times, especially early in the second half, the offense got really stagnant. 6 threes in the first half, but only 1 in the second half. And it's really tough to set up a press after a missed shot. That is hard to do. Bucknell got out in the second half, ran a little bit. Josh Basco made some threes. I think he finished with, 22? He was probably Bucknell's biggest offensive spark. Yeah, 22, 6 of 11 from behind the arc. But then again, you sub in Kyle Cuff, and he rips off 7 points by himself in about a minute. After the second half starts with, I think it was 4 missed threes, 5 turnovers, a couple missed layups, an offensive foul. It just feels like you're stuck in the muck. Then here comes Kyle Cuff. So the 1-2-2 zone and this sort of stuff, Johnny, that's outside the box, I think helps these guys, the Lucas Taylors, the Kyle Cuffs, be a bit more comfortable in their role because it's something they can really earn and really take pride in. Hey, I learned this thing in practice and I'm going to commit to it. And then when it comes time to in the game, I'm going to be the best at it I possibly can.
Absolutely. A couple more notes here before we tie a bow on Bucknell. And yeah, I think the Cuff point is interesting because he's always someone who has been more known for what he can do defensively than offensively.
I want to bring this up too. After the game, Kyle Cuff was one of the stars of the media scrum. If you've never been in the media side of things at Syracuse, the locker room is open. Media members can go in and talk to whoever they want. It's just based on who's done getting dressed, who's showered, who's eaten their post-game meal. I guess Kyle Cuff was front and center. Donnie Freeman was also one of the guys in the post-game media scrum who was made available. And he said that of all the players on the team, it was Kyle Cuff who gave a little speech to the rest of the guys about how the season is split up into 3 parts. And you have to mentally prepare yourself for this second portion of the season. You got the non-conference, you got conference play, then you have tourney time. And Freeman was referencing how he had never thought about it in this way and that he had to regather and mentally re-rack and recenter himself for a long stretch ahead. But Kyle Cuff is like a 4-minute-a-game guy. That's the big old question mark at all this. Is he the leader of this team emotionally? Is he the rah-rah guy? If so, cool. I'm glad Syracuse has someone like this.
Better him than nobody. Right.
Yeah, even though J.J. Starling is he's a great speaker press-wise. He doesn't seem to be the super high-energy crowd pumping up, throwing his fists around, talking crap. Eddie Lampkin will raw and jaw, but he's not exactly been consistent. So Syracuse has someone who's played at Kansas. Bill Self is probably the best coach in college basketball. So he's been there. He's been on an NCAA tournament team, even though he didn't play. He knows what it takes. And maybe that's why Kyle Cuff is the guy giving this speech, man.
Again, better him than nobody.
Yeah.
I'll take it. I think Syracuse fans will take it. Also, Ian, this was the second time in a span of only a couple of games here where we've seen Syracuse get a little feisty. We had that scrum. We had that Donnie Freeman, Eddie Lampkin getting into it with some of the Bucknell players. And, I think for a team that has gone through some lulls, moments like that are moments that you as a team can kind of rally around one another, right? Even in a quirky home game where it's during break, it's not super crowded, you're playing a team out of the Patriot League. Like moments like that are hard to kind of bottle up just organically. And
Mhm.
I think, a lot of times people see situations like that and it's, oh, come on, what are we doing? Let's let cooler heads prevail. I don't think that's the case at all. I think when you get into it, especially for a freshman like Donnie Freeman, to be standing up for his guys and having his guys' backs after I believe it was Lampkin who did kind of take the worst of
Yeah.
the contact at the underneath the hoop.
Mhm.
That was definitely something I wanted to make mention of. One other thing too, before we shift gears here, moving on to Wake, listening to the CW Network broadcast. According to the crew, I believe it was Tom Wormy and John Henson, former Milwaukee Buck legend, John Henson, legend, of course, in air quotes. But either way, they noted that JJ Starling, according to the Syracuse coaching staff, is getting pretty close.
Yeah.
I don't want to exactly quote them,
They
but they
just said
made it
very
seem like
soon.
very soon. Unlikely for Wake, I believe, is what I remember, but certainly made it seem like this is not something that is still a matter of even maybe weeks away, but maybe it's more so of a day by day kind of thing. So if you can get him back soon, obviously that's a huge blessing. I just hope, and you trust that the coaching staff and the athletic training staff would make sure this doesn't happen. I hope it's not a rushing him back situation where, okay, we kind of know what we are without him. We know we need him. Let's get him back when he's not fully 100% ready to go, because I think that could open up a whole new can of worms.
Yes, the injury happened. Well, we don't exactly know when it happened, but it was reported on December 3rd, December 2nd. So somewhere in between November 27th, when the Syracuse Orange beat Cornell at home, and then December 3rd, when they lost to Tennessee on the road. So it's been probably around a month. I know like 4 to 6 weeks was thrown out there at one time. But Johnny, you're totally right. With a hand with a broken bone, especially something in like the hand where they're all those small, it's a lot of little puzzle pieces put together. You mess it up, you aggravate it, yeah, man. One of those things that could go really wrong and derail your season. I mean, you see it in baseball all the time where guys come back too fast and their swing isn't right. And same thing,
Right.
like even though it's his offhand, his handle might not be right. His jump
You'd
shot might
hope
set up in a different way. Like that sort of
what,
stuff will have to,
yes.
there has to be adjustments there.
And you would hope that for a veteran like Starling, who has been through the ringer for a couple of years now, obviously at Syracuse and previously at Notre Dame, that he, knows himself and trusts himself to a point where, hey, if things are looking a little shaky, no, we're gonna take the time, we're gonna do what we need to do, we're gonna get this right, not just for himself, but for the long haul of the team as well. So a developing situation, one that maybe is nearing a close. Again, I'd be surprised if you see him on New Year's Eve, but
Mm-hmm.
after that, who knows? Maybe it will indeed be kind of a day-to-day type injury. Speaking of New Year's Eve, Ian, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons
Yeah.
ACC play is here, folks. Ready or not, it has arrived, and the Orange go into conference play at 500, 6-6 overall. The only conference game they've played already was a loss out in South Bend to Notre Dame. Wake presents a unique challenge in that it's kind of been a little Jekyll and Hyde for the
Mm-hmm.
Demon Deacons so far this year. Wins over Michigan, losses to Xavier, to a really good Florida team, held Minnesota, a Big Ten squad, to just 51 points, but then turned around one game later and only scored 44 against Texas A&M.
Another really good team, by the way. A&M's top 15 in Ken Palm.
Yep. So they have tested themselves against, some of the cream of the crop opponents across the college basketball sphere. And the results have kind of been what you've expected, unable to grab any really super marquee wins. They do have Hunter Salas, who is the guy. Wake goes as he goes, one of the top players in the ACC, and for good reason. This guy can score at a super consistent rate, comes in averaging right around 18 per game. After that, Ian, at least offensively, not a ton else there for the Demon Deacons this year.
Yeah, you wanted to surround him with guys that can really shoot, Wake wanted him to play more point guard this year, and it hasn't necessarily factored out that way. Throw a name at you, Johnny. Remember Tyler Johnson, former Louisville point guard?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so he entered the portal this past offseason. He could go to St. John's and play for Patino, this, that, and the third. I mean, he was a former, I think, top 75 recruit. He ends up at Wake Forest, and he started to become more and more of a factor as of late. I mean, even you see our friend Christian O'Jackson, who we went to last year to talk Wake Forest, advocating for Ty to play more and get Salas off the ball. So whether it's Johnson or Davin Cosby or Juke Harris at times, who I think is a NBA player, just a freshman right now, but I saw Wake Forest actually play live in person against Michigan, and Harris was super duper impressive. 6'7" freshman who can do a bit of everything and plays really good defensively. So I think for Wake Forest, getting Hunter Salas off the ball and taking a little bit of pressure off of him to produce is a big time key. Cameron Hildreth, whose name you probably know, ginger Englishman who's been around forever, hit some really big shots in the Wake Forest Syracuse game in Greensboro back in 2023 when Jim Boeheim's career went down. Honestly, he's really scuffled out of the gate, shooting under 40% from the field. He's only made 8 threes. That's a massive problem for Wake's entire roster. I mean, they're shooting 26% from 3. But you expected Hildreth to be the Robin to Salas's Batman, and that just hasn't checked out yet. So, yes, Salas will be the first name on the scouting report. But if Hildreth gets going, that's how Wake becomes really dangerous. And you could say the same thing for a Johnson or a Cosby, because these guys have scoring potential, but the consistency hasn't been there for any of the other names on the roster. And then Salas becomes a volume guy, and doesn't really work.
A couple of nuggets as far as Wake goes on their schedule, what they've done, who they've seen. They've yet to win a game on the road. 0-3 in true road contests. Again, not a lot of road games, a couple of neutral sites sprinkled in there, but obviously this is a true road game.
They just lost to Clemson by 9.
That was where I was going next.
Right.
They've played 2 ACC games already. Yes, they have lost to Clemson by 9, and they beat BC by 6 points. So again, we don't really know a ton about the conference per se yet in terms of how teams are going to stack up against one another once all these games start to get going. But there is kind of your basis of comparison. 9-point loss to Clemson, 6-point win over Boston College. That was back on December 7th, so a couple of weeks ago at this point. I think this is a real opportunity here for the Orangey, and I know Wake, is not by the time early March rolls around, probably not a top 4, top 5 ACC team unless things really pan out their way these next couple months. But that's not to say this can't be a game where you kind of set the tone for the rest of conference play. You've got your home court. You're coming off a win. You're getting a Wake squad that is beatable, and all you got to do is go look at some previous results. And I do think this is a real opportunity. I think it's no secret that if this game is going to roll the Orange's way, you can't let it be a Salas takeover game. Hopefully, like you were alluding to, it can become one of those situations where nobody else is really doing much, and you kind of force their hand, and he does become that volume guy, and you tire him out, and maybe the Orange are able to throw him different looks defensively to kind of keep them on their toes. But I'm really interested to see from a defensive standpoint, can Syracuse carry that momentum that they set against Bucknell into this one against a much more formidable opponent?
Well, think about what Syracuse did against Chaz Lanier. He wasn't doing much of anything, and then caught fire in the second half, eventually ends up with 20-something points. But in the first half, Syracuse guarded him pretty well. And all things considered, I would say Wake Forest secondary options aren't exactly what Tennessee has in bulk. So there is a possibility that Salas, who's also had rough games this year, I mean, against Minnesota, he got 4 fouls and he only scored 4 points in 31 minutes. That sort of stuff happens too. Salas takes a lot of defensive responsibility, because a lot of Wake Forest's other guards are smaller guys. And yeah, they'll match up pretty well with Syracuse, but if you can get him switched around, Wake will play mostly man-to-man. They'll do a lot of switching 1 through 4. If you can get him switched around, get a mismatch with a Freeman, or maybe get him stuck on Lampkin every once in a while, those sort of things happen where Salas will make a gamble on defense, or he'll foul because he's tired from handling the ball on the offensive end for 25 seconds. All that sort of stuff will happen to a star player if they're not 100% locked in. And as we've talked about, these games from Christmas to New Year's around the holiday times, when there aren't as many fans in the arena, right? When you've just seen your family and you're kind of restarting the motor again, and then starting to think about class and getting back, all that sort of stuff plays in to slow starts in these games. There is certainly a possibility that Salas isn't on his A game come Tuesday afternoon. On the Syracuse side of things, to be on your A game, as we saw against Bucknell, Lampkin's got to be a factor. I've said this over and over again, and I don't think it's going to be any secret coming into ACC play. Well, who awaits Eddie Lampkin this time, you may ask? It is 7 foot, 240-pound Efton Reed in the red corner, and he is pretty darn good defensively. Not much to speak about offensively. I mean, he's got a post move or two in the bag, but Wake Forest as a team is 5th in the country in block percentage offensively and top 30 in the country in block percentage defensively. So shots don't get blocked a whole lot when Wake goes to the rim. And when teams go to the rim against Wake, Efton Reed is patrolling the paint, blocking a shot almost 15% of opponents' possessions. So that's 1 in every 8 or 9 shots that is getting blocked by mostly Efton Reed. That's going to be a problem.
We'll see how much the Orange try to lean on the perimeter scoring if Reed does indeed be a real force down low.
Yeah, if he's not in foul trouble, Steve Forbes will have him out there for 30, 35 minutes. No question.
He's a name that might sound familiar because he does have previous stops at Gonzaga and LSU as well. So if you are a fan of college hoops outside of the ACC, you've definitely come across his name at some point.
He was on that. I think he was on that LSU team. Actually, no, he wasn't. He was on Gonzaga at that point. But just back to the rested point, Wake hasn't played in 10 days. So just, I would say, even better than Syracuse. The legs are fresh.
Right.
So Reed will certainly get a lot of run.
He will get a lot of run indeed, as will Salas, as will probably Hildreth. A lot of these Wake guys who, again, have the resume to back it up. It's just about what version of the Demon Deacons are you going to get. Game is Tuesday, 2 p.m., so you'll have plenty of time to soak it all in before New Year's Eve festivities get underway.
Dick Clark, Syracuse alum.
ESPN2 will be the network that the game is broadcasted on. Hope you enjoy it. Again, all conference play the rest of the way, so buckle up because we are about to get a much better idea of what the rest of the Atlantic Coast, first year of a new look Atlantic Coast Conference, is looking like here in 2024 and 2025. We'll be back to break it all down with you tail end of this week. Get you set for a trip down south. Orange going to Tallahassee this weekend to take on Florida State. But until then, with Ian, I'm Johnny saying so long. Enjoy the game. Happy New Year. We'll talk to you next year. And go Orange, as always.